Welcome to a journey through mirrors of darkness and dimensions unknown. In this video, we explore 3 chilling tales where antique mirrors become gateways to horrors beyond comprehension. From haunted reflections to parallel worlds and sinister doppelgangers, these stories will captivate and chill you to the core. Get ready to peer into the depths of these mirrors and uncover the secrets they hold. Sarah had always been drawn to the past. As an aspiring historian, she spent countless hours sifting through dusty archives, piecing together forgotten stories. So, when she stumbled upon an ornate antique mirror at a bustling flea market, she felt an inexplicable connection. The mirror's Gothic frame, intricately carved with serpentine patterns, seemed to whisper secrets of another time. An old woman, her eyes sharp and knowing, watched as Sarah examined the mirror. "That mirror has a dark history," she said, her voice gravelly and filled with warning. "Are you sure you want it?" Sarah laughed lightly, dismissing the old woman's words as mere superstition. "I'm not afraid of a little history," she replied, handing over the money. She couldn't wait to add this unique piece to her collection. That night, Sarah placed the mirror in her living room, carefully positioning it to reflect the cozy warmth of her home. She admired its craftsmanship, marveling at how something so old could still be so beautiful. As she prepared for bed, she glanced at the mirror one last time and froze. Reflected in the glass was the image of a woman in a vintage dress, her face contorted in terror. Before Sarah could react, a shadowy figure emerged, violently attacking the woman. Sarah spun around, heart pounding, but her living room was empty. She shook her head, attributing the vision to her tired mind. Yet, as she lay in bed, sleep eluded her, haunted by the vivid image she had seen. Over the next few days, the disturbing reflections persisted. Each night, Sarah witnessed scenes of brutality and death in the mirror. The images were always different. A man being strangled, a child screaming in terror, an old woman collapsing under the weight of a blow. Sarah's curiosity was piqued, and she began to research the mirror's origins. It wasn't long before she discovered a chilling connection. The mirror had once belonged to her great-grandmother, a woman shrouded in mystery and whispers of scandal. Delving deeper, Sarah found records of unsolved murders in her family's history, all dating back to the 1920s. Her research revealed a horrifying truth. Her great-grandmother had been involved in a series of gruesome murders, using the mirror to trap the souls of her victims. The mirror was a vessel of torment, a prison for the damned. Sarah was horrified, but she couldn't stop herself from uncovering more. The reflections grew more intense, showing her graphic scenes of her ancestors' crimes. The climax came when the mirror began to show Sarah herself, committing violent acts as if predicting future events. Terrified, she realized the mirror was trying to possess her, forcing her to continue its cycle of violence. Desperate, she attempted to destroy the mirror, but it showed her a vision of her own death if she tried. Trapped in a battle of wills with the mirror, Sarah sought help from a psychic renowned for dealing with cursed objects. The psychic, a woman with an air of ancient wisdom, revealed that the only way to break the mirror's hold was to confront and acknowledge her family's dark past. Together, they performed a ritual to confront the trapped souls and her great-grandmother's malevolent spirit. The ritual was a fierce struggle between Sarah and the mirror's dark forces. With the psychic's guidance, Sarah acknowledged the atrocities committed by her ancestor and apologized to the trapped souls. The mirror shuddered, its surface rippling like water before shattering in a burst of energy. The trapped spirits were released, their anguished cries fading into silence. Though the mirror was destroyed, Sarah was left haunted by the experience. The past she had always been so fascinated by had revealed its darkest secrets, and she could never look at history the same way again. As she stood amidst the shards of the shattered mirror, she felt a profound sense of sorrow and resolve. She had confronted the darkness of her family's history, but it had left an indelible mark on her soul. Sarah was restless that night, unable to shake off the lingering unease that had settled over her. The ritual with the psychic had been exhausting, both physically and emotionally. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the tormented souls, their eyes pleading for release. The knowledge of her great-grandmother's monstrous deeds weighed heavily on her, a burden she wasn't sure she could ever fully escape. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself drawn to the history she had once loved. She delved deeper into her family's past, seeking to understand the events that had led to her great-grandmother's descent into madness. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that her ancestor had been a complex and troubled woman, driven to unspeakable acts by forces both internal and external. Sarah's research took her to the local archives, where she spent hours poring over old newspapers and records. She learned that her great-grandmother, Elizabeth, had been a woman of great beauty and charm, but also one haunted by personal demons. Elizabeth had lost her husband and child in a tragic accident, and it seemed that grief had driven her to the brink of insanity. The mirror had appeared in her life shortly after the accident, a gift from a mysterious stranger. It wasn't long after that the murders began. Elizabeth's victims had all been people she believed were responsible for her suffering. The mirror had been a tool of her vengeance, a way to trap their souls and exact her revenge. Sarah shuddered as she read the details, feeling a chill run down her spine. The more she learned, the more she felt the weight of her family's dark legacy pressing down on her. One evening, as she sat in her dimly lit study, Sarah's phone rang. It was the psychic, calling to check on her. "How are you holding up?" the woman asked, her voice gentle and concerned. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "It's been hard to process everything. I can't stop thinking about what my great-grandmother did." "It's natural to feel that way," the psychic replied. "But remember, you've taken the first step towards breaking the cycle. You confronted the darkness and freed the trapped souls. That's something to be proud of." "I know, but it's still hard," Sarah said, her voice heavy with emotion. "I feel like I'm carrying the weight of her sins." "You don't have to carry that weight alone," the psychic said gently. "Your great-grandmother's actions were her own, not yours. You've chosen a different path, one of understanding and healing. Don't let her darkness overshadow your light." Sarah nodded, even though the psychic couldn't see her. "Thank you," she said softly. "I needed to hear that." As the days turned into weeks, Sarah continued her research, determined to uncover the full story of her family's past. She found solace in understanding the events that had shaped her great-grandmother's life, and in doing so, began to find a measure of peace. She realized that while she couldn't change the past, she could learn from it and ensure that its darkness didn't define her future. One day, while sorting through a box of old photographs, Sarah found a picture of Elizabeth. The woman in the photograph was beautiful, with a haunting sadness in her eyes. Sarah stared at the image for a long time, feeling a deep connection to the woman who had been both a victim and a perpetrator of terrible deeds. "I forgive you," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I forgive you for what you did, and I hope you found peace." In that moment, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew the journey towards healing would be long, but she was ready to face it. She had confronted the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to build a future free from the shadows of the past. As she looked around her study, filled with the artifacts and remnants of history she loved, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would continue her work as a historian, but now with a deeper understanding of the complexities of the past. She would honor the memories of those who had suffered and strive to bring their stories to light. And as for the mirror, its shattered pieces had been carefully collected and buried, never to cast their dark reflections again. Sarah knew that some things were better left in the past, their power broken by the light of understanding and forgiveness. In the quiet of her home, Sarah felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in a long time. She had faced the darkest part of her family's history and emerged on the other side, stronger and more resilient. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer held her captive. She was free to build her own future, guided by the lessons she had learned. And as she looked into the new mirror she had placed in her living room, Sarah saw not the shadows of the past, but the reflection of a woman ready to embrace whatever the future held. Mark and Lisa had always dreamed of owning a home with character, a place where history whispered through every creak of the floorboards. So when they stumbled upon the old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, they knew they had found something special. The house was a bit run down, but it had good bones, as the real estate agent put it. They spent their first day moving in, their excitement palpable as they explored every nook and cranny. Late in the afternoon, they decided to tackle the attic. The small, dusty space was filled with forgotten relics and old furniture draped in white sheets. As they sifted through the clutter, Lisa's eyes landed on a tall, ornate mirror tucked away in the corner. Its dark, twisting vines carved into the wooden frame gave it an eerie yet alluring charm. "Look at this, Mark!" Lisa called, her voice echoing in the confined space. "Isn't it beautiful?" Mark turned, and despite the grime covering the mirror's surface, he could see its potential. "Yeah, it's definitely something. Let's clean it up and see how it looks downstairs." They carefully carried the mirror down to the living room and spent the next hour wiping away years of dust and dirt. When they finished, the mirror gleamed, its surface smooth and reflective, almost like a dark pool of water. "We'll hang it right here," Mark said, pointing to a spot on the wall opposite the couch. "It'll be a great conversation piece." As they admired their handiwork, Lisa felt a slight shiver run down her spine. She chalked it up to the drafty old house and the long day they'd had. Little did they know, the mirror would soon become the centerpiece of their nightmares. That night, as they settled into bed, the house seemed to groan and settle around them. Lisa lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of their new home. Mark was already snoring softly beside her. She finally felt her eyelids grow heavy when a faint noise reached her ears, an almost imperceptible whispering. She sat up, heart pounding, and strained to listen. The whispers seemed to be coming from downstairs. Gathering her courage, she slipped out of bed and made her way down the creaky staircase. As she entered the living room, the whispering stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Lisa's gaze was drawn to the mirror. For a moment, she saw nothing unusual, but as she turned to go back upstairs, a movement in the reflection caught her eye. She froze and turned back to the mirror. In the dim light, she saw shadowy figures lurking behind her, their forms shifting and indistinct. A scream caught in her throat as she spun around, expecting to see intruders. But the room was empty. Her heart raced as she turned back to the mirror, but the figures had vanished. She stood there, trembling, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination. The next morning, over breakfast, she hesitantly told Mark about the strange incident. He laughed it off, attributing it to the stress of moving and the eerie atmosphere of their new home. "It's an old house, Lisa. It's bound to make weird noises, and you were probably just half asleep," he said, squeezing her hand reassuringly. Lisa nodded, trying to believe him, but a sense of unease lingered. Over the next few days, the visions in the mirror became more frequent and more disturbing. Mark and Lisa began seeing nightmarish scenes, shadowy figures stalking them through dark forests, abandoned buildings, and deserted streets. Each vision depicted an alternate reality where they were hunted and tormented by unseen entities. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching TV, the mirror's surface rippled like water, drawing their attention. They saw themselves in the reflection, but their mirrored selves were terrified, running from something unseen. The couple watched in horror as their doppelgangers were chased and ultimately captured by the shadowy figures. Mark grabbed Lisa's hand, and they both bolted from the living room, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. They retreated to the safety of their bedroom, slamming the door shut behind them. "This can't be real," Mark muttered, running a hand through his hair. "It's just a mirror. How can it show us these things?" "I don't know, but we can't ignore it," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "There's something terribly wrong with that mirror." Desperate for answers, they began to research the mirror's history. Late one night, while inspecting the frame, Mark found a hidden compartment. Inside was an old, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. They sat down and began to read, their unease growing with each entry. The journal had belonged to a sorcerer named Elias Crowley, who had lived over a century ago. He had created the mirror as a means to trap and torment souls, using their fear and suffering to fuel its dark power. The entries detailed Crowley's descent into madness, his obsession with the mirror, and the horrors he had witnessed within its depths. "We're dealing with something far beyond our understanding," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to find a way to destroy it." Determined to break free from the mirror's grip, Mark and Lisa decided to destroy it. They grabbed a hammer and approached the mirror with trepidation. But as they raised the hammer, they felt an invisible force holding them back. The air grew thick with a malevolent presence, and they found themselves physically unable to strike the glass. "It's like it's protecting itself," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "We can't destroy it by force." Frustrated and terrified, they turned back to the journal for answers. One of the last entries detailed a ritual that could break the curse. It involved summoning the shadowy entities and banishing them using ancient incantations. "It's our only chance," Mark said, his jaw set in determination. "We have to try." The mirror seemed to sense their resolve, its surface showing them a vision of the ritual. The images were horrifying, depicting the danger and potential for failure. But Mark and Lisa knew they had no other option. The night of the ritual, the house was eerily silent. Mark and Lisa gathered the necessary items and began the incantations, their voices trembling with fear. As they chanted, the room grew dark and cold, the air filled with whispers and sinister laughter. The shadowy entities emerged from the mirror, their forms shifting and malevolent. A fierce battle ensued, with Mark and Lisa using every ounce of their strength and courage to banish the entities back into the mirror. The struggle seemed endless, the entities resisting with all their dark power. Finally, the incantations took effect. The mirror began to crack, the entities screaming as they were sucked back into the glass. With a final shattering blow, the mirror broke into countless pieces, releasing a surge of energy that knocked them off their feet. As the dust settled, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the haunting visions ceased. Mark and Lisa, exhausted and bruised, looked at each other with a mixture of relief and triumph. They had faced the malevolent forces and emerged victorious, breaking the mirror's curse once and for all. The next morning, they carefully gathered the shattered pieces of the mirror and buried them far from the house, ensuring its dark power would never harm anyone again. The old Victorian house, once a place of terror, became a home filled with light and peace. Mark and Lisa knew they would never forget the horrors they had faced, but they also knew they had conquered their fears and emerged stronger, ready to embrace their future together. As they settled back into their lives, the house seemed to welcome them anew. The creaking floors and groaning walls no longer held an ominous undertone. Instead, they were comforting reminders of the history they now shared. The mirror's dark presence had been vanquished, leaving behind only the echoes of the love and strength that had defeated it. Mark and Lisa continued to explore the secrets of their Victorian home, but now with a sense of wonder rather than dread. They discovered hidden compartments, old letters, and forgotten treasures, each piece adding to the rich tapestry of their new life. One day, while sorting through a box of old photographs in the attic, Lisa found a picture of Elias Crowley. The sorcerer's eyes were dark and intense, hinting at the madness that had consumed him. She shuddered, grateful that his legacy of torment had been broken. "We did it," she whispered to Mark, who had joined her in the attic. "We really did it." "We did," he agreed, wrapping an arm around her. "And we'll make sure this house is filled with nothing but love and happiness from now on." As they stood together in the attic, the sun setting behind them, casting a warm glow through the small window, they felt a sense of closure. The shadows in the glass were gone, and in their place was a future filled with endless possibilities. Mark and Lisa knew that life would still have its challenges, but they were ready to face them together. The horrors of the mirror had strengthened their bond, teaching them the true meaning of courage and resilience. And as they walked hand in hand down the creaky stairs, they knew they had found not just a house, but a home. Jessica had always felt a deep connection to her grandmother's old Victorian house. Its creaking floorboards and whispering walls held generations of memories and secrets woven into the very fabric of its existence. When her grandmother passed away, leaving behind a legacy of stories and possessions, Jessica found herself drawn to one particular item, an antique mirror that had always hung in her grandmother's bedroom. The mirror was a piece of craftsmanship from another era, its frame intricately carved with twisting vines that seemed to writhe and coil with a life of their own. Jessica had spent countless hours as a child admiring her reflection in its surface, seeing glimpses of her grandmother's smile and the warmth of their shared moments. Now, as she stood before it in her grandmother's bedroom, the mirror seemed to beckon her with a silent promise of secrets yet to be revealed. With a mixture of nostalgia and curiosity, Jessica decided to take the mirror to her own home. She carefully wrapped it in old blankets and drove back to the city, where she hung it in her bedroom with reverence, hoping to preserve a piece of her grandmother's world in her own. At first, life continued as usual for Jessica. She juggled her work as a freelance writer with the routines of daily living, the mirror becoming a familiar presence in her apartment. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, Jessica began to notice subtle changes, a shift in the mirror's reflection that she couldn't quite explain. One evening, as Jessica prepared for bed, she caught a movement in the mirror's reflection out of the corner of her eye. Turning slowly, she saw herself, or rather, a version of herself, trapped in a dark, decaying room. The other Jessica pounded on invisible walls, her eyes wide with fear as she mouthed silent pleas for help. Jessica's heart raced as she reached out tentatively, fingers trembling against the cold glass. She called out, her voice barely a whisper in the silence of her bedroom, but her reflection remained trapped in its own nightmare. Pulling back, Jessica watched as the trapped Jessica's expression twisted into one of anguish before the reflection returned to its usual state, a perfect mimicry of her own movements. Shaken to her core, Jessica tried to rationalize what she had seen. Perhaps stress or grief was playing tricks on her mind, she reasoned. But the image haunted her dreams that night, the dark room and the desperate pleas etched into her subconscious. In the days that followed, Jessica's fascination with the mirror deepened. She found herself drawn to its surface, as if compelled by an unseen force to unravel its mysteries. The trapped Jessica appeared more frequently, her presence growing stronger with each passing day. Through silent gestures and fleeting glimpses, she communicated with Jessica, revealing fragments of a parallel existence, a world where Jessica was imprisoned by an evil version of herself. Driven by empathy and a growing sense of responsibility, Jessica turned to her grandmother's old journals and letters for answers. Amongst the faded pages and crumbling ink, she uncovered fragments of a past she had never known. Her grandmother had been aware of the mirror's sinister nature, warning of its ability to bridge different dimensions and trap unsuspecting souls. One particular letter stood out, a desperate plea for help, written in a trembling hand. In it, her grandmother described attempts to destroy the mirror, only to be thwarted by unseen forces that seemed to protect it. Jessica realized she was facing something far beyond her understanding, a force that had plagued her family for generations. As Jessica's connection with the mirror deepened, so too did the malevolent entity's influence over her world. Strange accidents began to occur, each one seemingly orchestrated by the evil doppelganger to weaken Jessica's resolve and break her spirit. It became clear that unless she intervened, she would be the next victim of her own reflection's malevolence. With determination born of desperation, Jessica resolved to confront the mirror and save her imprisoned self. She gathered items mentioned in her grandmother's writings, a mix of ancient symbols and protective talismans. The mirror awaited her, its surface shimmering with an ominous energy as she stood before it, steeling herself for the battle ahead. In a moment of revelation, Jessica understood the only way to break the cycle of torment. She had to switch places with her doppelganger, sacrificing herself to free the trapped Jessica. The plan was risky, fraught with unknowns and dangers she could scarcely comprehend, but she knew it was the only way to end the suffering. With trembling hands, Jessica enacted the ritual, invoking ancient words and symbols that hummed with power. The mirror responded, its surface rippling like dark water as the dimensions began to shift and merge. Shadows coalesced, forming a doorway between worlds as Jessica braced herself for what lay ahead. In a blinding flash of light, the switch occurred. Jessica found herself in the dark, decaying room, her senses assaulted by the stench of decay and the oppressive silence. She looked through the glass, seeing her doppelganger standing on the other side, free at last, but haunted by the ordeal they had both endured. For a moment, their eyes locked, a shared understanding passing between them before the dimensions sealed shut, trapping Jessica in the mirror's world. She pounded on the glass, screaming for release, but her voice was lost in the void between dimensions. Days turned into weeks, then months, as Jessica waited, trapped in a world of perpetual darkness. She watched as the mirror was eventually sold at an estate sale, passed on to an unsuspecting buyer who would unknowingly continue the cycle of horror and deception. Through the glass, Jessica saw glimpses of her old life, a world she could no longer touch. She wondered if anyone would ever understand the truth of her imprisonment, or if she would forever remain a silent specter, a warning to those who dared to peer into the depths of the mirror. And as she stared out into the void, Jessica knew one thing for certain: the echoes of the mirror would haunt her and those who encountered it for generations to come. In the end, Jessica's sacrifice was a testament to the darkness that lurked within the mirror, a darkness that transcended time and space, echoing through the ages in whispers of horror and despair. Thank you for joining us on this chilling exploration of haunted mirrors and parallel dimensions. Which of these terrifying tales resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay tuned for more spine-tingling stories. Until next time, may your reflections be clear of darkness